Good morning, everybody. I've had quite a journey today to get here, which I'll tell you about in a second. But I just want to thank Hayano again for inviting me to be here this year, as I was a couple of years ago. I was originally incredibly excited because this would have been a trip somewhere other than Melbourne, where I've been locked down for almost 2 years. But sadly, I find myself still in Melbourne. I don't know if you've been watching the news this morning, but Melbourne had a miniature cyclone hit, which is highly unusual for Melbourne. But I was at another house an hour and a half from where I'm currently sitting at the moment. So I had to make a last-minute decision shortly after I woke up and make the decision to get in the car, to dodge all the flying trees and debris, the trucks that had been blown off the road, and everything else to make my way here today. I'm not looking for applause. But if the keynote is terrible, you can at least say something lovely about how I worked really hard to get here to speak to you all today. The house that I was in lost all its power. We lost the internet. We lost everything. So it's kind of nice to be in Melbourne again where it's warm. Can I just begin? I know you've acknowledged country today, but I am somewhere very different. So just to acknowledge that I'm presenting from the lands of the Wurundjeri people from the Kulin Nation, and just pay my respects to elders past, present and emerging. So my presentation today is called Is Listening to Children Work or Play? And I think often in Western cultures and Australian culture, we tend to think of consultation as work, and we tend to think of play as the opposite of work. What I want to do today is disrupt that just a little bit and try to make a case for seeing play not just as play, but also as a form of consultation. So I'm assuming today that I'm speaking to kindred spirits, that all of you understand the virtues and the importance of listening to children, what they have to say about their world, their play spaces, their leisure spaces, but also, particularly in this era, about issues of global importance like climate change as well. The other thing I know that we share today is that we all have an interest in play. Otherwise, it's hard to imagine why you would be at the Nature Play Conference, Summit. But I'm very glad that we all have that shared interest. But today I don't want to focus on why we should consult, because I am assuming that all of you know why we should listen to children. Today I want to focus on how we consult, the ways in which we can and do consult with children. So in my main job, as Hayano said before, I am a researcher mostly. I'm also a cook and an uncle, and I have a few other jobs. But I have two main interests in my research. One is outside schoolhouse care, which many of you will be familiar with. The other one is ways of listening to children in research. So today I'm going to present to you some findings from my most recent research project, which I commenced in 2019 prior to the pandemic. Sadly, the research was never completed. It's highly unlikely now it will ever be finished, but it's still generated some really interesting data that I want to share with you today. So I'll share with you details of the project shortly, but for me this work has been really significant because this has changed how I think about consultation, particularly with the youngest children. And I'm hoping that for all of you in the consultation work that you do in early childhood, in outside schoolhouse care, in other forms of education, and also in play, that you might find value in some of the things I'm talking about today. All right, let's go. Zoom presentations. Hopefully you can also see the slide, and my hard artistic work looks magnificent on the big screen. Today I want to start with a bit of theory, because I think theory is really important. I'm not going to spend too much time with theory, but I think it sets us up today for the discussion I want to have. Theory informs how we see the world and how we make sense of it. If we open ourselves and allow ourselves to understand and to engage with different theories, we can see the world differently. So today I'm going to talk about a school of theories that might be familiar to many of you, but perhaps not to all. I want to talk about binaries. I know that most of you will probably know what a binary is. A binary is a language practice. It's a thing that we establish with our words where we position two different things or two groups of things as opposites. Now, there's a lot of theories about binaries that help us to understand how they're established and the effects that they have. But the thing about the theory of binaries is that they are more than just simple opposites. According to a French philosopher, Jacques Derrida, he says that in Western cultures like Australia, we have a habit of organising things into binaries, and that these binaries have effects for all of us and the way that we experience the world, particularly when we're part of a binary. So in binary theory, there are two halves to the binary. One half, the dominant half, is what we call the preferred term. The dominant half of a binary is seen as, and I put it in inverted commas, the good half of the binary. The dominant term in a binary gets all the social privilege. They get the money, they get access to great places, they get great jobs. The other half of the binary is seen differently. It's seen as less desirable. It's seen as problematic and broadly undesirable and less. In our lives, in our world, the dominant half of the binary gets the good stuff. So I'm going to give you some examples that you should all be familiar with, but I want to preface this by saying that in no way do I believe that these binaries are true. All right, let's look at the man-woman or male-female binary. In Western cultures and Australian cultures, we see men and women as binary opposites. We see men as strong, objective and rational, the brave hunters who go out and bring food, the provider who brings back a slaughtered deer or something for the family, someone who's adventurous and does the hard work of discovering things. Women, on the other hand, in our culture are often understood as the opposite. Not strong but weak, not objective and rational but emotional. We don't see women often as brave, we see them as timid. We don't see them as hunters and providers. We see them as gatherers who are based at home, who stay there to look after the children. Now, I've said I don't believe that this is true, and this would not surprise anyone who knows me. And I know for all of you that you would also recognise that this is not true. But this is how our culture sees this binary of male and female. And now another example, adult and child. I'm using Barbie today. Barbie was always a good touchstone. But we see adult and child as a binary as well. Think about how we look at adults compared to children. We see adults as mature, developed, fully developed. They've gone through Piaget stages. They've reached the stage of being a productive adult who generates money and resources and material goods for our economy. We see adults as responsible for themselves, but also for others. They are also the teachers and instructors, and they are seen as civilised. Children, on the other hand, we see a little bit differently. Children are not seen as mature. They're seen as immature. We see them as developing rather than fully developed, so incomplete. We see them as playful and irresponsible rather than productive and responsible. The child is not the teacher, they are the person being taught. And instead of seeing them as civilised and in control, we see them as being a little bit primitive. Now, I know these ideas are uncomfortable, but there's heaps of research to back this up. In the West, this is an uncomfortable truth about how we sometimes compare children and adults. But today I want to focus on another binary. I want to look at work and play. We also construct work and play as binary opposites. We see work as the business of adults. We see work as something that is serious, productive and purposeful. Play, on the other hand, we see differently. We see it as the business of children. It's frivolous, it's not productive, and it's chaotic, or at least this is how we see it. This doesn't mean that we don't value play in our culture. We do, because all of you are here today for the Childhood Summit. Yep, and you will be, you were yesterday and again tomorrow. That demonstrates that a lot of us have incredible value and recognise the worth of play. However, in our culture, we are a little bit contradictory in how we think about play. Adults who play for a job or adults who just like to play are sometimes dismissed in our culture. We talk about them as having Peter Pan syndrome. We describe them with words like slackers or immature. And also think about how our world works. Most of us get paid to work, but not to play. For adults who play for a job, we get to have the enjoyment of doing play for a job. But let's face it, the rewards aren't as great. People who play for a job in outside schoolhouse care and early childhood and teaching and play work get less money than lawyers, politicians and hedge fund managers and literally just about everyone else. Play is underestimated in our culture as the binary opposite of work and just a useful way to occupy children until they're old enough to be productive. And I don't like that binary. So today I want to go about the work of disrupting the binary. Even in our business, when we talk to politicians, when we talk to policymakers, we try to justify the importance of children's play. We do it through the lens of work. You know, we describe school and play as being a child's work, you know, which it is, but I don't think it's the justification for it. Play has many other incredible qualities, and I think just saying that it's children's work and therefore it's important because of that diminishes its value and its importance. And the other thing it does when we look at things in a binary way like this, it conceals the ways that play can assist us in working with and living with children. All right, this is my last little bit of binary theory. The thing is, binaries are not true. It will not surprise you to hear me say that. Binaries are fictions, or in my business, we call them social constructions. They are things that we construct with our language and our interactions with each other. The truth about all binaries, including work and play, is that they're not simple oppositions. They're very complex and much harder to pin down. So think about it. Let's think about work and play. Are work and play really opposite? So I'm going to give you examples as to why they're not. Play is not just the business of children. Adults also play. Yep. Adults play all the time. Next week in Melbourne, we have Melbourne Cup Week. We have a public holiday for a horse race, but there will be footage on the news of adults doing jokes, engaging in make-believe, wearing dress-ups and playing games at a racetrack. Yeah. And then we also sometimes ignore the fact that children also work. School is really hard work. Children help in the home. They help in family businesses and properties as well. But it's not just a case of who works and who plays. Play and work intersect and overlap in other ways. Lester and Russell, English play theorists, describe that children bring play into adult workspaces. And you see one great example there from COVID last year, a young child photobombing his father's Zoom meeting. And there are heaps of examples of this. But children bring play to the adult world and to each other's work. However, it's not just play coming to work. We also engage in work during our play. So often in my research, I draw on a leisure theorist called Chris Rojek. And Rojek says that our play is never, ever really free, that we often engage in work while we play. When we're at leisure, if we're at the gymnasium or if we're out with friends, that we often engage in worry. We worry about the work that we have to do on Monday or tomorrow. We worry about the well-being of our children and our family members and our friends. We also worry, according to Rojek, about how we look. He says we do something called identity work. We worry about how we appear, whether we present ourselves in a way that's consistent with our identities, what our clothes look like, what our hair looks like, how we walk, how we conduct ourselves. And according to Rojek, and this is the thing, it's not just adults that do this sort of work during play as well. So in my previous research, I've also shown that children engage in emotional labour and worry and identity work during their play as well. So it's not just adults play and children work, it's also play and work intermingle whenever we're doing one or the other activity. So what I want to do today in the rest of the keynote is I want to trouble the work-play binary. I want to talk about a specific type of research. So I want to talk a particular type of work, which is research. So research is emblematic of work. It's dominated by adults. It's very serious business. We generate knowledge. We write stuff that people use, which informs educational practice. Very important work. My research that I do is a form of consultation with children. Which is why I think it's relevant to all of you today, because most of you in the room will also engage in forms of consultation with children in your own work. So what I would like you to do is carry forward these ideas you see on the screen now about binaries and why binaries really aren't opposite, and to use this theory to come on a bit of a journey with me to consider whether play, as well as being play, can also be a form of consultation. All right, I can sort of see you all there. It kind of helps me to connect a little bit. All right, I hope I'm doing all right. I try to be a good presenter. All right, let's talk about the research project. So I want to do this quickly to get on to the juicy parts. But this project was commenced in 2019. It was a consultation with a group of 7 children, which in Melbourne we call PrEP, or Foundation, I think, for Queensland, so children in the first year of school who went to OSH. The purpose of the research was to develop a survey for adults who work in OSH, and I wanted to produce a survey that captured what was important to this group of 7 children. So I used 4 different consultation activities with the children. So the first is what we call photo elicitation, which is really where I give children a digital camera and ask them to take photographs of things in the OSH program that are important to them. I also asked them to draw pictures about what was important to them at OSH. So things they like to do, whether it's at after school care or at home or somewhere else. I also asked them to do a ranking activity where I had photographs of different play activities and asked them to rank them in order of importance. And then at the end of every single one of these activities, I would sit down to interview each child to ask them about their photographs, their drawings and their rankings. So you can see here I had a range of different ways, and part of the purpose was to give children flexibility about how they spoke to me and how they shared their ideas. However, for me, this sort of consultation is fairly standard, and I imagine for many of you this is sort of fairly standard, a standard way of consulting with children. But there was something about this consultation that was fairly unique, and this is what I want to talk about today. So when I planned the research, I drew on a project that was conducted by Blaisdell and her colleagues that they delivered in an early childhood setting, which is also play-based. But what they decided to do, and therefore what I decided to do as well, was to embed the consultation in the play-based setting. So traditionally in research, when we do things like photo elicitation and interviews with children, we do it in a separate space. We'll do it in another room or an adjacent space where it's a little bit private, where you're not being interrupted by other people and everyone can focus on the job at hand. You don't get distracted by what's going on. But I went the non-traditional approach. I decided, because I just went on a hunch, and I'd read this research and I was excited, I decided to embed the 4 consultation activities in the play-based setting. So this after-school care program was based mostly indoors. And if you can imagine, it was a very large indoor space with a whole range of different tables and spaces set up around the program. There was a home corner with a children's, oven and a dining table and crockery and those sorts of things. They had other tables where they could draw, do construction, do art activities, play board games, cubbies, spaces to hide, that sort of stuff. And then I also had what was called the research table. So every day I went in, I sat at my research table with one of my 4 different research or consultation activities and invited children to participate. Children could leave or enter the research space as they desired. If they didn't want to research and didn't want anything to do with me, they didn't have to go there. If they started researching and they wanted to go do something else because it looked much, much more interesting than what I was doing, as it often did, then they would leave also. The thing was that this decision to embed the research in the program, in a play-based setting in this way, had extraordinary effects, and I'm going to describe some of those to you shortly. But as the project progressed, the children became increasingly comfortable moving in and out of my research space. So a lot of my power that I wielded as an adult researcher from a university, someone who's supposed to be very important, the children began to ignore. What I discovered was that all of the children were much more interested in focusing on play than perhaps I would have liked. Whilst I had one child who researched for long periods with me, most would only research for a few minutes. And what happened because of this free movement in and out of research resulted in a really non-traditional research space. My research activities often didn't contain any of the children who were part of my project. They were instead populated with other children who wanted to do research but weren't part of the project. Or if we were researching, they'd kind of photobomb or crash the space, interrupting interviews and other activities. Research was also interrupted when children got distracted by stuff going on in the other part of the room. So what happened over the course of a few weeks was, instead of being a very serious traditional research space where the children and I were involved in the production of data and the production of knowledge, I was very quickly in charge of the most playful, noisiest, messiest and most chaotic space in the after-school program. So it was not exactly traditional research. And in fact, I was kind of worried after a while that I was being a terrible distraction to the program. I knew that the sorts of things that happen in my research space were often not tolerated in other parts of the program. The children, when they were with me, were kind of going a little bit wild. And I was worried not only whether I was being a good citizen at the before and after school program, but I was also worried that my research, this thing that I'd created, this monster, was actually going to produce anything that was useful as a form of research or data. So what I'm going to do with you now is share 3 anecdotes, 3 stories from the research about what the research was like in action, and for you to consider whether in these examples, whether research and play are actually binary opposites, or whether play has a role as a form of consultation. All right, so my first story. This story is called Doing Photo Research with Max Speed. So Max Speed was my best researcher, right? He was the child who always wanted to research. Every day when I walked in the door, he'd be lined up ready to go at the research table. He was so keen to research that he would often do activities 2 or 3 times in a row every single day. You know, I exhausted research activities with Max Speed. We were sitting there, he'd just taken photos, and we were about to start his interview when across the other side of the room, Isabel called out. And she said, "Bruce, the animal show's on today." So that was her invitation to me to play. I said, "Well, I'll be there in 5 minutes, okay?" And she pushed back. She starts to bargain. She says, "Bruce, 3 minutes." And then, you know, I had work to do, so I pushed back again. I said, "No, 5 minutes. I'm talking to Max Speed. We're doing photographs." All right? So she went away. She returned to the animal show, which you can see in the photo there. But then exactly 5 minutes later, now I don't know for certain whether she was keeping time, but 5 minutes later she yelled out from the space she was in. She said, "Bruce, your time is up. Your time is up. You need to come and look after the baby lions." So Isabel was in a space you see in the photograph there. The staff and the children called it Steiner. She was coordinating an animal show where the animals that you see in the photograph were giving birth to baby animals. So she'd arranged the animals with her friends into pairings, parents that gave birth to babies. They were one of my favourite things in the program and the research, because not only were the babies born and then had to be cared for, but they were born kind of like a rocket countdown where we counted down from 10, and instead of saying blast off when we got to 0, you'd hear the call go out, "Babies!" And then you'd look and all of a sudden babies would magically appear. Now, when you think about this example, this story I've told you, to an outsider looking in, You might look at that and say, well, in this example, research and play really are binary opposites here. Bruce and Max are doing photo research. They're hard at work at a table, and Isabel and her friends are on the other side of the room engaged in play. But the reality is that it was not a binary. From the moment that Isabel called out, I was not entirely with my mind on work. I was constantly looking over to the other side of the room to watch for the birth of baby animals, right? It was great. I took so much joy from animal shows. And so my thinking was both in work or research and consultation and play. Yeah. Rojek says that while we play, our thoughts can be at work. This is an example of how when we're at work, our thoughts can also be on play. I was also engaging in identity work. I was very conscious about how I was perceived by the service. Did I even look like a researcher, or did I just look like some crazy guy who'd come to the after-school care program and was turning it upside down for about 2 or 3 months? So I found myself monitoring how I spoke, how I sat, how I looked, what I wore. So you can see how that work compromises any sort of play and work I was engaged in as well. But it wasn't just me, right? It was Isabel as well. So Isabel's play was rendered more work-like because she was engaged in the labour of trying to draw me away from max speed and draw me into the Steiner space. So you can see from this example that even though we think that work and consultation are separate to play, they're really not. In a whole range of ways, the two were intersecting. All right. On to the next story, and I'll try and make sense of all of this for all of you at the end, but I hope this is taking you to a useful place. All right. So first, when I kind of experienced these playful interventions, children like Isabel trying to draw me into Steiner or other spaces, I felt a little bit uncomfortable. You know, I was supposed to be there doing research activities. Foucault, another French philosopher, says that often when we conduct in our ways that disrupt social norms, that we feel uncomfortable and conspicuous. And I think Foucault's theory here helps me to understand that discomfort I felt in moments like this with Max Speed and Isabel. You know, I was constantly trying to project and conduct myself in a way that made me look like a researcher. However, the longer, the longer I went on, the more I became comfortable with the intermingling and the overlapping of play and research. I became less inclined to discourage children like Isabel when they wanted to play, and I instead welcomed them into the space. So one magnificent example of this I want to share today is the baby dragons. Baby dragons might very well be my favourite thing. My wife heard about baby dragons every day I did this project. So I was at my research table on this particular day. No child wanted to research. A few of the other children came up and wanted to take photographs and things, and I don't like to leave anyone out, so that was okay. Then Emily and Isabel, so Isabel again, appeared at the research table. They were on their haunches and they were making a noise, and the noise went like this, mak, mak, mak. And I smiled at them because I knew this was an invitation to play, and they said it again, mak, mak, mak. They said, we are baby dragons. It was the last time they spoke English. Mak, mak. The baby dragons then left me at the research table. They went back into the program space. They went to home corner. They went all over the indoor space. They were very, very loud and very disruptive. They got in trouble from the educators, but they were very busy talking to each other in baby dragon language, loudly. Now, again, if we see this in a binary way, we just see this as children's play. But over time, I began to realise that the baby dragons, or being a baby dragon, actually had a role, an important role in the consultations I did with children. So on this particular day, on another day, I was doing box research with Isabel. So she'd done a ranking of photographs, and I'd started to ask her questions about her rankings, but Isabel did not like answering questions. Yep. And as I asked the first question, instead of answering the question, she said, "Ma." And I said, "Are you a baby dragon?" "Ma, ma." I said, "Do you still want to research?" "Ma, ma, ma." My colleague, Kylie Smith, says that when we research and consult with children, we need to take account of play. The play is the way that children withdraw consent to participate in consultations and research. So it's not just research. If you're having a conversation with a child about what to do in the program, what activities they like, if they decide to return to play, this is a way, according to Kylie, of children withdrawing consent to be in that conversation. In this instance, for Isabel, by going back to being a baby dragon, she was telling me that she no longer wanted to consult. Yep. So in our world, there's a power imbalance between adults and children, particularly the roles that many of us have as teachers, as people who are in charge of children's settings, for me as a researcher. And it's very difficult for children to tell us no, that they don't want to keep doing something. So what I've realised now is that in this example, me endowing Isabel with the right to turn into a baby dragon whenever she wanted to, was me giving her the right to be able to say, Bruce, I've had enough. Yep, I don't want to do this anymore. She couldn't say it in English to me, but allowing her to play gave her the power to say it to me without actually using the word no. So again, you see, right, research and play, not opposite. Yes, it was play, and it was incredibly funny play and enjoyable play, but it also had a role in consultation. All right. The last story from the research I want to share with you is this, and this may be one of the more important stories from the research. My last example relates to drawing. So before I started the data collection phase with the children, before I started doing photo elicitation and the 4 activities, I would draw, I'd hang out with the children just in the program to get to know them so that we became more familiar. And then when the research started, we'd understand each other a little bit. Perhaps the key activity during that part of the research was drawing. So often the children would ask me to sit at the drawing table. And it wasn't research drawing where I asked them to draw pictures of us. We just drew pictures for the fun of it. But once the data collection started, so once I started the actual consultation, I kind of wanted to, stop doing this familiarisation or playful drawing. However, my participants didn't have the same idea. So on one day, 2 6-year-old boys, Poop and Toilet, the children chose their own names, and Poop and Toilet were the names they chose. Good on you, boys. Both age 6 approached me. And as they did every single day, they would come up to me and say, Bruce, can we do drawing? These 2 guys never wanted to research. But on this particular day, they phrased it differently. They said, Bruce, can we do drawing research? Now, this was a very deliberate and what Foucault would call a political act. What they tried to do, what they sought to do by inserting the word research after drawing was to position the work that we did together as more serious, more purposeful, and therefore more like a traditional concept or more like work and research. And I try in my research to listen to children, to try and understand what they're telling me. And with very young children, it's often difficult to understand what a child might be trying to tell you. And in this moment, I tried to listen to Poop and Toilet. And what they were trying to tell me, I think, was that when they drew with me in this way that you see in the photograph, that they saw this also as a form of work and a form of research. Kind of makes sense, right? I'm the researcher, they're doing it with me, it's a form of research. So I kind of opened myself up to this, and it changed the whole trajectory of the research. It became the terminology for the project. Every single child involved in the project started referring to everything we did as research. So drawing became drawing research. Photo elicitation became photo research. Sorting and ranking became box research, and interviews became talking research. So this was a way of working together to construct our own terminology. And this was really significant because it meant that the children were more willing to engage in research as a consequence of this, particularly interviews. Yeah, they didn't like interviews. But once it was called talking research, because they developed the name and it positioned it differently, they became more interested in engaging. But the other thing it made me do is this. It made me question my own binaries about consultation and play. So I had dismissed this drawing as just play, That was its only worth. And it doesn't mean it's worthless, but I saw it as something that was a form of enjoyment for the children and I, but not necessarily having value of research. But I went back to my literature and I did some reading. And then I started to be open to the possibility that play, drawing like this, might actually be a form of consultation. If poop and toilet saw it as consultation, then perhaps it was. And what I started to realise that in the conversations I had with children when we were sitting there drawing pictures together, that we had conversations and that these conversations gave me really important insights into what was important to the children I was working with. And I got different data. So when I was with Max Speed and I was asking very formal and pre-planned questions, he was routinely turning up data that was useful. It was less frequent with poop and toilet and some of the others when we drew, but I learnt stuff that I would never, ever have learnt through a normal conversation. The one thing I learnt from poop one day is that we were drawing together like this. That may very well be Poop's hand. In fact, I think it is in the picture. And the drawing we did was that they asked me to draw an outline and then of a flower or a lizard or something that I felt relatively competent drawing. And then they would colour it in. They might add a few stickers, write their name on it, and it became their drawing. In early childhood and OSH, as many of you will know, that we like children to draw for themselves, not colour in stuff that adults have drawn. So I asked him and I said, so why do you like this kind of drawing, Poop? And he said, because this is how I draw with my mum. He said, I've drawn with my mum like this since I was a little boy. So all of a sudden it changed how I saw this type of drawing. It was no longer just a distraction that they tried to engage me in to keep me from research. For them, this was important. It had cultural importance and family importance. And if I was working in that OSH setting, I would suddenly, I think, start to see this form of drawing as more important. And I would instead not fall back on binary understandings and say that you need to draw your own pictures. I can't do that for you. I think it changes how you see some of those things. So there were lots of examples of this through the project where I learnt different things when I played alongside children. So it changed the conduct of the research. I still did some of the 4 activities, but sometimes I kind of just hung out. I hung out at the drawing table. I would hang out in the cubby. I'd hang out in Steiner doing animal shows and try to engage in conversations with children. I learnt different things and I was playing, but it was still a form of consultation. Consultation isn't purely work. It can also be play. All right, I'm very conscious of time and the fact that I've only got about 7 or 8 minutes left, so I'll keep going. So what does all this mean? But hang in there for these slides. It's some of my best work. Some of you might be wondering what the point is, and I'll try and bring it to a conclusion here. In the West, in Australia, we see work and play as a binary. We see them as separate activities. And these understandings of binaries inform the way that we work as adults, Consultation is supposed to be adult business. Objective, serious information gathering that we use in our work teaching children and supporting their play. Play is the business of children, It's the object of research rather than the way in which we conduct research. The argument I'm putting forward today, though, is that play is not simply the opposite of work. They intersect, and I've given you 3 really great examples today of how the two intersect in multiple and complex ways. Play, if we want it to be, and if we open ourselves to it, be a way of collaborating with children and learning about what is important to them. For many of us, we already engage in consultation with children. And in the time that throughout my career, what I've seen of a lot of programs is the way that we choose to consult with children, we tend to do when we're in adult mode. We adopt forms of consultations that reflect adult ways of being. Once-a-term meetings, formal consultations, where we interview children, suggestion boxes, surveys and enrolment forms. In many ways, we run our play-based settings when we consult like government departments or offices. These methods can be effective, but they don't always work in the best ways for children. I think we can also consult through play, drawing alongside children, being with them in their play spaces, sharing experiences with them is another way to learn about children and what they want to do with their play and leisure. Blaisdell and her colleagues said that for them, opening up to play as a form of consultation was kind of like, boom, boom, letting go. I love using Princess Elsa or Queen Elsa when I'm doing a keynote. I experienced it in the same way. As this research progressed, I realised that just like Princess Elsa, I also needed to let go. Let go of my adult ways of working and be more open to play as a means of consultation. By letting go, we open ourselves up to children's way of being in the world, and we allow ourselves to co-construct knowledge with children rather than draw knowledge and information out of them. These consultations, when we play alongside a child, instead of being linear and work-like and rigid, become joyful, unpredictable, funny, free and child-directed, the very things that all of you I know value about play. So I'll very quickly go through this slide because I've talked about much of this. But this decision to see play as consultation had multiple effects for me. It increased participation in the research, as I discussed. When the consultation became more playful, children wanted to play. It produced fascinating insights into what was important to children, that I learned different stuff when I was playing to what I learned when I was engaging in more formal research approaches. Interviews changed significantly. My original intent was that interviews would be conducted one-on-one, but because I was embedded in the play-based space, and often in play-based spaces, interviews became like a focus group, and not just with kids who were doing the research. Children who weren't even part of the research contributed to interviews and discussions. Initially, I saw this was a flaw and the fact that my interviews were kind of broken, but I now just see it as a different form of consultation, a co-construction that involves multiple children rather than just one. As I've described, it changed the terminology for the project. It also had implications for consent. Play became a way of granting and withdrawing consent, as I've described. The other great thing about it, though, was that because the research was based in the program, children could see the research in action. And that meant they were more informed when they wanted to decide whether or not to participate. Perhaps, and it's not a drawback, perhaps one of the tricky aspects of the research, though, was that it was much slower. When you play alongside children as a means of consultation, it is much slower. And I know that in the Western world, and all of you will be the same, that we are rewarded as adults for being efficient with our time and with our money. Adult means of consultation are much more efficient, but they don't give us the same knowledge. What I'm suggesting to you is that I think there are very good things that come from resisting the call to be efficient with time and money. Work slow, play alongside children, open yourselves up to their ideas. All right, the last slide. So my point today is this: there's plenty of ways to consult, and I think often our discomfort with consulting playfully with children is that we feel in a way that we don't think we should. We feel less serious, less adult and less professional. I know in play-based professions, because I've worked in them my whole career, we often struggle for respect. We are often seen as people who just play with children. And how do you even get respect when even our most serious and adult work is playful? Well, I'm going to suggest this to you. In my family, during lockdown, we've been watching lots of Netflix and streaming services. Recently, we've been watching Billions. I always draw my inspiration from pop culture. It's a show, if you haven't watched it, about hedge fund traders. The central character there is Bobby Axelrod, who you can see on your screen. Not necessarily a great person, but he's the central character. Anyway, they have a saying in Billions: that when you see a way forward, when you see a way to get rewards for them, it's money and power. But for us, I think, when it's learning new things about what's important to children, that sometimes you might have to experience a certain level of discomfort. And Bobby Axelrod will say that you need to lean into it, to lean into the discomfort. So I would suggest to all of you that to consult playfully with children, something I consider profoundly worthwhile and far more enjoyable than consulting in traditional ways, lean in to the discomfort of being seen as less serious and less adult, because I think the benefits are theirs. In professions like yours, where play is the very reason for your jobs, why on earth would you want to keep play at arm's length? Play has value for children and all of us as adults as well. I say disrupt the binary, transform your work by finding ways to make play the means as well as the subject of your consultation. And thank you. I know I'm not in the room with all of you today. You've got my email address there. And if anyone ever wants to email me and chat, there's an open invitation for you to do that. So if you want to jot that down, that's great. So thank you very much.
Thank you, Bruce. Thank you very much.